as we go ahead and start the program, we're going to go ahead and start with a quick poll. So the first question that we have is, we want you to rate the level of power that you think Latinas have nationally. And then also, what do you think that, how would you rate the level of power that you think Latinas have in Colorado? So we're going to bring up the poll and we're going to give you a minute to go ahead and answer the questions. Okay, let's go ahead and see types of responses we have. Okay, well, it looks like the largest percentage of 68% show that nationally Latinas that are participants on this webinar feel that we have some power. In terms of Colorado, split between 37% saying not sure and 53% saying some power. Thank you for participating in that. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this evening's maestra, Irasema Garza. She's an independent policy consultant in Washington, D.C. She's an attorney by training and has significant policy experience across a broad range of issues, including gender, labor, and immigration. Irasema has over 20 years of experience as an attorney and in senior positions with 2 federal administrations, the U.S. Department of Labor, including the U.S. Department of Labor. In these and other positions, she has gained wide-ranging experience in coalition building, public awareness campaigns, employment policy creation, and resolution of labor disputes. So I am proud, and it's my honor today to call Irasema not only a friend, an advisor, but my personal maestra as well. Welcome, Irasema.
Oh, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me. And I want to thank also the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado for inviting me, and of course, my very dear friend, Rachel. And thanks, Rachel, for that very lovely introduction. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit about, kind of a little bit of background about why we're going to talk about the things that we are going to talk about this evening. First thing I want to say is that I've been in Washington, D.C. for about 30 years or so. And during that time, the Latina population grew exponentially. I mean, we just had this massive explosion of our population growth. But yet in DC, where policy is made, the reality is that Latinas continue to be invisible in any policy discourse. I always say that we're lucky as Latinas if we even make it to a footnote of whatever document that they are preparing. So for whatever reason, there's this blind spot that politicians and business leaders and other institutions have when it comes to Latinas and our community generally. I also feel very strongly that the media, the mainstream media, continuously fails our community. It is a really powerful and important institution, American institution. And politicians listen to the things that they're covering, and because it gives them a pulse, I think, of what the country is thinking and feeling. So they tend to cover those types of issues, and politicians will listen. But I don't think, for me, the reason that I think we continue to be invisible and ignored by the media, et cetera, is because I don't think that politicians, as business leaders and these other institutions have a really good grasp of sort of the size of our community. And they really don't understand how the success of the country, both now and in the future, is very much linked to the success of Latinas and Latinos in this country. Now, I know each one of us here has our own lived experiences. right? We know what we are experiencing. We saw that in that poll. You have like, your opinions are based because that's what you live every day, right? And I think that's fantastic. And I think that we need to voice them, as you just did. But I also think it's really important for us as Latinas to sort of be informed about what's happening in our community, in our state, and nationally as well. So tonight, I'm going to share with you, or this evening, see, I'm in Washington, D.C., so it's a little bit later. So if I say tonight, that's what I mean. So excuse me for that. But I want to share data and information with you about Latinas. It's taken me a little while to collect it, maybe 6 or 7 months working on it at different times. And it's out there. It's just hard to find sometimes and put it collectively in one place. So I want to share this data because I very much hoping that when you go back to your daily lives tomorrow or the next day, that you use some of the data that I'm sharing with you to begin to like formulate questions, right? Because in order for us to have solutions, we have to figure out what the question is first. And then hopefully that'll just, spark some thinking and not about sort of the things that we can do to better ourselves. That's always important. And our familia and our comunidad and all, but that collectively we start thinking about how do we as Latinas use the power that we have, right, to better our Latina community and that of our familia. So let me start by saying that the Latina population right now in this country exceeds 30 million. And by 2030, and I really think that those projections are off a little bit, but projected that by 2030, Latinas are going to be 30% of this country. That means that 1 out of every 3 females, I meant 30% of the female population. So 1 out of every 3 women in this country is going to be Latina. It's huge, right? And one other thing that I don't think we often hear, but I think it's important for us to know, is that 80% of Latinas in this country today, 80% are US citizens. Those Latinas that are 18 years and younger, 94% of them are citizens. And 500,000 Latinas turn 18 every year. Now, why do I say this is important? Because that is very much a potential political powerhouse, right? So it's just something important for us to keep in the back of our minds. It's very, these numbers them in and of itself doesn't give us political power. Obviously, we have to exercise it. But what I'm saying is we have the numbers. And importantly, Latinas are voting at much higher numbers in every election since 2004. And they outperformed Latinos, at least in 2018. And the numbers, the data hasn't come out for 2020 yet. But in the latest numbers that I saw in 2018, the midterm elections, Latinas outperformed Latinos by 5 points. So we're voting more. This is next, I'm going to share with you something that I think is also incredibly important. The Latino community contributes $2.6 trillion to the US economy. That was in 2018. That number is probably closer to 2.8 trillion now. That number seems like, trillions. It's a huge number, right? But here's what it means. It means that it is, if we take the Latino community, if we were our own country, we would be the largest, we would be the 8th largest economy in the world, okay? What we contribute to the US economy is twice the size of Mexico's gross domestic product, as their economy. And it's bigger than Brazil's economy. And so this is really huge. And guess what? Latinas have a huge influence in where that money is spent. Oh yes, you got it. At least 50%, if not a lot more. We decide where those dollars, of those trillions of dollars, are being spent. So how is it that we as Latinas contribute to the economy and Latinos? Well, we consume. The US economy, I'm not an economist, but as I understand it, the US economy, the vast majority of it, grows through consumption. So for example, you buy a burrito in a restaurant in Alamosa, and then the restaurant owner gets to hire people who then earn money, who then turn around and spend that money elsewhere. Y así se va. No, we just, and that's how we grow our economy. I mean, that's a very simplification, but that's what it is. So how do Latinos, why are we consuming more? Well, the population growth that I just talked about a while ago has just grown exponentially. The number of Latinas in the labor force is absolutely critical to the success of this country going forward. Let me tell you why. 60% of Latinas were in the labor force right at the beginning of the pandemic in January of last year. In 20 years ago, we didn't even have 30% of Latinas in the labor force working outside of the home. So that means that, women Latinas that are between the age of 16 and 64, right? 60% are in the labor force, all right? Latinas are very young. Our median age is 30. The median age, compare that to the white women population, is 44, right? So as white women that are baby boomers are going into retirement and leaving the labor force, right? Who's going to fill in those jobs? Latinas. Like, we are critical to the labor sector. I can't emphasize how huge that is going to be for this country going forward. And so we go in as Latinas, start joining the labor force, they start working, and they start contributing, right, to their Social Security, et cetera. That helps those people that are retiring, all those baby boomers that are retiring, they're going to be able to retire with dignity and get benefits and everything because young Latinas are in the labor force. And that is a fact. Another thing that's happening is that more Latinas are getting college degrees. In fact, not only are Latinas graduating from college at higher rates than Latinos, right? 60% of the college degrees that are being awarded to our community are going to Latinos. So we get 60, and Latinos, our male counterparts, are getting 40. So that is really also an incredible stride, given the many obstacles that Latinas encounter along the way when trying to get a higher education. So more education also means that you're less likely to get laid off, and you're more likely to earn more. Now, all of that contributes to this trillions of dollars into the economy. That's how our community is doing it. Now, there's this company called Nielsen's. I don't know if you've heard about it, but they poll people very regularly because what they're trying to do is figure out what are the sorts of products you buy and what are the sorts of brand loyalty that we have, because this helps the companies. So they are the ones that do these polling on Latinas and determined that in fact, we have this huge influence on the trillions of dollars that, that we're spending. And one of the things, and I know everybody here knows this, is that Latinas spend a lot of money on beauty products. We all know that's true. We like our beauty products, right? So just for one moment, I just want you to think about what would happen if Latinas decided not to buy Maybelline or another brand, for example, or not go to a particular store just for a couple of months. What do you think is going to happen to that particular business? That's just how much power we bring to the economy, okay? So one of the other things that's really important is that Latina businesses are the fastest growing segment in the United States. Latinas know how to start businesses, and they are the ones that are growing. And small businesses are the ones that employ the most employees in the United States. But here's the catch. Unfortunately, Latina businesses are only able to raise about 1% of the $277 billion in venture capital. This was in 2020. So they don't often have the capital to grow their business. But again, imagine if they did. Imagine if we were able to access those sorts of dollars. So now I want you to think, that was a great, all the strides that we've made. Despite many, many challenges, these are all the good stuff that our community is doing. But now I want you to think about that and contrast it to what I'm going to share with you right now. Latinas have one of the highest poverty rates, if not the highest, of any group in the country. So at 30 million, we're about 18% of the US population, but 27% of Latinas live in poverty. That is very disproportionate. And when Latinas are, head of households, single moms, which we have many more Latinas than other groups are single moms and the only breadwinners, the poverty rate jumps up to like 31%. That's pretty high, and it's higher than any of the other groups, male, female. Okay, so there's a number of reasons why I think that contributes to the poverty experience of Latinas. One of it, and we all hear this year after year, is the wage gap, right? Latinas only earn about 54 cents for every dollar that a white male earns. But they also earn less than every other group. Every other, white women, African-American women, Asian women, we earn less than them. We earn less than Latino males, Asian males, white males, African-American males. We earn less than every other worker in this country, okay? So there's also something called occupational segregation, and I'm sure you are familiar with this, but basically what it is that too many Latinas, right, are segregated in low wage service type of jobs. So in 2020, when COVID hit, by April of that year, Latinas had lost 20% of employment. In other words, they lost more jobs than any other group again, all right? So why? Because Latinas were concentrated in those service jobs that were of industry that was very hard hit by the COVID-induced economy. So we ended up with 20% unemployment among Latinas. That means millions of Latinas without a job. So in these occupations, the service-related occupations, they have a weekly average earnings of about $511 a week. And that is only $12 below the poverty threshold. So in other words, they at 511, right? By $12, they've missed the poverty threshold. So, and they are the ones, I think it's, let me see, it's 25% of all Latinas in the country, 25% are employed in the service-related occupations. And we have a lot less Latinas, only 90% in professional-related occupations, compared to 34% of white women and 26% of Black women. Again, we are at a very, big disadvantage. Okay, so all of this contributes to poverty. So now let's talk about health and health insurance. I think everyone has seen the numbers, and you see it often on, television about how it's really, COVID is really hitting our communities. But, it's yes, and it's really unfortunate, but it's not, it was to be expected. First of all, the economy hit all the women that were already earning less. They were already, at a disadvantage. Then we look at the health situation, right? Latinas are the least of all other groups, again, likely to have health insurance, right? Out of everybody in the country. Latinas also live in multi-generational homes, which means, sometimes abuelita lives with us, or tias, or, and also in close quarters. So the more of us that live together that way, the more likelihood that we're going to get a COVID infection. Not to mention, right, that 27% of Latinas worked in frontline occupations. So they're the ones that are out there, cleaning the hospital, serving the, food, that come into constant public contact. They're at the, in constant contact with the public. So all those things have also added to the number. And also, in other words, COVID was a really cruel thing. In many ways, it seems like it was this equalizer that was hitting everybody, equally. But in reality, yes, everybody can get COVID, but Latinas are much more likely than everybody else to get COVID. So, and I also want to say that for our sisters, our undocumented sisters, they have had even greater economic challenges for many reasons, right? Their job opportunities are even more limited. And I'll tell you something, in the United States, undocumented people are barred from buying health insurance, even if they can afford it. Through those Obama exchanges, the ACA exchanges, they are prohibited from buying health insurance through those exchanges, even if they could afford it. So, and many of our Latina communities cannot afford it. So they remain uninsured, and it has contributed to what we are seeing right now with COVID ravaging our communities. Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about what's happening contrasted with what's happening in Colorado. So in Colorado, the Latino population is about 22% of the overall female population of Colorado. So that's a little bit higher than the national one. Remember, we talked about the national one being 18%, but generally it tracks a lot of the same statistics. And Latinas in Colorado have about a 9% unemployment rate. Right now, nationally, I believe it's dropped down to 7.3%. Remember, as high as almost 21% a year ago, but it's still higher than when we started the pandemic. But Latinas are getting back in there, and they're getting back in there to work. And again, very much part of the economic engine of this country, all right? So in Colorado, although Latinas make up 22% of the population, they make 27% of the COVID cases. Again, for all the same reasons that I just discussed with you. We live in multi-generational homes. And a lot of times, yes, we are very family oriented. La familia es importante, queremos vivir juntos y estamos tratando siempre de estar juntos. But the reality is that a lot of times we live in small homes and multi-generational homes because we can't afford it otherwise, right? And all of this contributes to COVID, that and inability to purchase health insurance. Okay, so in Colorado, almost 18% of women, Latinas in Colorado, don't have health insurance. That's close to probably the national average, which is about 17.5 or something. So it is very, very close. And again, for the same reasons, it is expensive to have, and they cannot afford healthcare. Plus, Latinas also work in industries where the employer doesn't provide health insurance. So we tend to work in those types of industries. Sometimes, as Latinas, you're a home health care provider, or you provide daycare, or you're working for a really small mom and pop shop that doesn't have health insurance, etc. So we tend to be in those types of industries that don't have health insurance. And before I continue, I always also wanted to say that one of the huge issues that was facing our country and facing Latinas during this big COVID epidemic is that many of our Latinas are not able to get unemployment insurance. Why? Because the unemployment insurance in this country was meant to be a social safety net, and it is not. What it does, it requires many states that you have to have certain amount of earnings to be able to access unemployment insurance. Well, Latinas are generally the ones that are a lot of times, laid off, or they have to take part-time work, not, voluntarily, involuntarily. So they're not going to be able to earn enough credits, if you will, to be able to access that unemployment insurance. So while a lot of people lost their jobs and were able to get a little bit of help through this unemployment insurance system, only about half of Latinas were able to access unemployment insurance. Big problem in this country, and something that really needs to be very much reformed. And again, for our undocumented sisters, they're not able to access unemployment insurance. Why? Because of their status. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about in Colorado is domestic violence. I want to make sure that I mention that 19% of Latinas in Colorado live in poverty. 19%. That's a lot of Latinas in Colorado, right? That live, in poverty. So, and it's also about the same as, it is not the same as a national average, because the national average is about 27%. But still, 27% living in poverty in Colorado is significantly high. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about is that, like, I believe out of every 3 Latinas in Colorado are victims of domestic violence. That is also a big problem in our community. What happened is, with the stay-at-home orders, domestic violence went up. Anytime that there is an economic issue in our country, like, you know, with the back in 2010 when the economy crashed, or any type of economic crisis, domestic violence goes up. It's unfortunate, but women are the victims of that, and Latinas are, you know, victims of domestic violence as well. And for undocumented sisters, that's even worse, because a lot of times they cannot call the police for assistance for fear of getting deported. Okay, so now I want to take just a little bit of time to ask you. We're going to do a little poll here again. I want you to think about 3 things that you can start doing tomorrow. I am wrong about that. I want to ask you, do you feel that you can share the information? Yes, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you feel that you can share the information that I just shared with you with your community to further educate other Latinas? Is it important that we know what's happening in our communities? How do you feel about that? So we're going to take a minute. You're going to answer that. And then we will look at the results as we did with the first poll. Okay, can we see what our, great, those are really good numbers. I'm so happy that you think this is important information that you can use to talk to other hermanas about. That's really, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, with me. So, I'm trying to see what our time is, but for right now, we have an activity. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this session, right, is to look at all the great things that are happening in our community, because the reality is that we as Latinos, you know, and Latinas, you know, we work hard, we persevere. It doesn't matter that, well, it does matter that we're discriminated against, because there is labor market discrimination, and one of the reasons why we end up in the jobs that we do. And I also wanted to say to you, even though, you know, we have more women graduating from college and all of that, the one thing I didn't share with you that's really troublesome to me is that we still have more than 25% of Latinas not graduating from high school. And that is an issue. And think about this too, because, you know, it's true that with more formal education, we do earn more. But, you know, for Latinas, even Latinas that have PhDs, let's say one of the highest, right, you know, degrees, they still earn less than men that only have like a bachelor's degree. So there is something else going on besides, you know, all these other obstacles that we have, and it's got to be discrimination. I mean, there is this sort of insidious structural discrimination in the labor market that contributes to our inability to have more opportunities to better our lives in that of our families. And so for me, you know, what I wanted to do is for you to think about all these positive things and all these challenges, and how do we use the good stuff, right? The fact that we've got control over all this money, you know, that we are the ones that are fueling the economic engine of this country, right? And so all of those good things, how do we use that collective power that we have? We're voting in higher numbers, all of those things, to address some of the challenges that continue to plague us and keep many of our sisters in poverty and their children, and really keep us from opportunities that would allow us to do much better. So I want you to think about 3 things that you can start doing tomorrow, right? That perhaps can address those sorts of challenges. And I'm going to give you like a minute or so, and please think about that, jot them down using the chat box. Enter your responses, and then I'm gonna monitor the chat box, and then I'm gonna share a few of the participant responses with the rest of the group. So we'll start right now. Okay. Wow, I see like really awesome suggestions coming through the chat box. Every single one of them has been like so good, except one that said, haha, I didn't know what that meant. Let's see. So the very first one that I saw was vote more Latinas into local office. You know, share the information from today with your familia and let them know the economic power that they yield. We need more Latinas in education to provide support for those leaders to succeed in their roles. So create opportunities for Latina leaders to network. Let's see, the good ones, support local and Latina-owned small businesses. Absolutely. Why doesn't the media ever say that, right? I hear them always talking about supporting small businesses. Well, you know, Latinas create a lot of the small businesses, so that's who we should be supporting. Educate my daughters on what it's like to be a strong and powerful Latina. Absolutely. And so those are just, you know, empower our fellow Latinas by supporting and educating each other. Advocate for social and political reform. Amen. all of those were absolutely terrific ideas. And, you know, I thank you. I know that we have this in our community. I know that if we worked collectively, using sort of this information about the economic power that we bring to this economy, the political potential, the political powerhouse that Latinas, you know, have, that we could really change this narrative. So I thank you so much for those. So some of mine, right, would be, because we always have to start at the beginning. So one of the things that I, you know, would say is like, register to vote if you're eligible, and encourage your familia to vote. And, you know, for our sisters that are undocumented, I can tell you that I have encountered and met like just amazing, powerful, great Latinas who are undocumented and walked the streets of Arizona in the very hot sun last election cycle to make sure that people that could vote would be registered to vote and to get out there, because they thought that the election was existential, right? Because of the immigration situation that we have. So there's work for all of us, like in this. And then one of the other things that I always say is call your legislators. And I'm going to give you, if you don't have this information, I would love to share this with you. Is like, whoaremyrepresentatives.org. And that, if you go to that site, you can see your local representatives, your state representatives, and your national representatives. Plus, you can click on their names. It gives you their email address, their phone number, etc. You always have to remember, I want to tell our community, is they work for us. They work for us. Our tax dollars pay their salary, right? They're our representatives. And sometimes we, you know, let them off the hook because we don't call and say something. Like, if you see challenges or issues in your community, speak up, get involved. And if you think that you need, you know, another red light, or something needs to be fixed, or, you know, the niños are getting hurt because the sidewalk is broken or whatever, we need to speak up and say, you know, we need help in our communities. Our communities are important, and our children are important. And this is something that some of you mentioned as well. Run for office, even locally, because those are where big changes, you know, can be made. Or run for Congress, but yes, more Latinas in political office is absolutely necessary. You know, in 2018, I grew up in Texas, and in 2018, for the first time in the history of this country, we had 2 Latinas from Texas elected to the U.S., to the House of Representatives. You believe that? In 2018, that is a pretty incredible. So yes, we need to, and those sisters are doing a great job. So we need to do that. Here's another one that I think we ought to, you know, really think about, is hold corporations accountable for their actions. Sometimes they don't do good by us, right? You know, we don't want for them to give us $5,000 to the local organization. Okay, that's great, that's fine too. We want them to invest in our communities, like real targeted strategic investments, because we spend trillions in the economy and buying their goods, you know. So we should be able to say, you know what, we do this. Now, don't give us a $5,000, you know, charitable contribution only. You know, we need for you to invest in our communities to make real change. Give our things, you know, our kids need scholarships. We need, you know, all these other things that you all know better than I in your community about, you know, what you need. You know, and finally, you know, I was thinking, the one thing that we can do too as Latinas is, guess what? We don't buy their products. Like I said, I just wonder if Latinas stop buying beauty products for just a week or two. I think that whole thing would come down because we like our beauty products. And that's just maybe a silly example, but it is the truth. And so just things to think about, plus everything else that you all wrote down was absolutely brilliant. And it just gives me so much, like, you know, just hope and ganas and everything, because it's always good to be in the room full of sisters and talking about important issues. Okay, I think that we may have enough time for a few questions or not. Let me see. So we don't have a whole lot of time for questions, but I'm going to tell you what you can do, okay? So I gave the foundation and the organizers here my email address. So if you have any questions, please email me. I don't know that I have the answers to everything, but I will certainly try. And if I don't have it, I'll try to find it. And so let's do that. And that way I can take my time answering and try to be more accurate. So I think that it is, we have like, so I think just in closing, I just want to thank you so much for being here today, this evening, and, you know, taking time from your busy schedule. I know how hard it's been, particularly women that have children, or, you know, you just have so many things that are going on in your life. So thank you so much for joining us here today. Again, I really do believe that that collectively we have the power to sort of change the trajectory, alter the trajectory that we have been placed on, right? About taking lower jobs, about not getting paid as much, about, you know, being ignored by policymakers, by, you know, none of our important things being covered or considered when there are major policy debates. It just breaks my heart, because I know that we're at the center of some of those issues, and yet we are always excluded. So I hope that the information that I provided you today was useful, and that it is going to give you, you know, some just something to think about, in other words, and to try to figure out how do we come together, not just individually, of course, our familia, our communities and everything. We need to make changes nationally. We have to start somewhere, and I agree, we do locally, we do state, we need to start addressing some of the major issues that are happening in our country. At, you know, at every level. I had so much data to share with you today, but, you know, it's very difficult to just be talking numbers into a computer. But I will tell you, and I'm going to stress this again, the success of the US economy, the success of our ability as a country to compete internationally in the future is very much dependent on our community and on Latinas. And if they don't have to like us, they don't have to anything. This is something that it is an economic imperative for our country to understand that they need us to succeed. And that, I think, is a really important message to take forward, that we are key to this economy, that we are the engine that's going to bring it back from COVID, and que ya es tiempo. They need to start paying attention to what we bring to the table and what our communities need. So thank you very, very much. Please stay safe. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and email me. I would be very much, very grateful to be in touch with you. So have a wonderful evening. And thank you, Rachel, and thank you to the foundation for giving me an opportunity to present some of this data.